I'm Hazel, 29 years old, and I've learned that betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the people who are supposed to love you most. For my entire life, my parents promised me a $60,000 wedding fund that they'd been saving since I was born. But when my moment finally came, I discovered they'd given every penny to my sister Madison for a down payment on her dream house instead. The worst part wasn't even losing the money, it was being called selfish when I dared to protest. If you're watching this and wondering where family loyalty ends and self-respect begins, you're in the right place. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and eventually finding my own strength. Growing up in our middle-class suburban neighborhood in Michigan, I never felt like we were wealthy, but we were comfortable. My dad worked as an engineer at a local manufacturing company, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. We lived in a modest 4-bedroom house with a small backyard where we had barbecues in summer and built snowmen in winter. My childhood was pretty normal and happy for the most part. I was always especially close to my dad. He taught me to ride a bike, helped with my science fair projects, and took me fishing on weekends. We had this special ritual where every Sunday morning we'd make pancakes together while Mom and Madison slept in. During those quiet mornings, he'd tell me stories about his own childhood and share life lessons. I thought we had an unbreakable bond. My sister Madison is 2 years older than me, now 31. If I'm being honest, she's always been my parents' favorite, though they vehemently denied it whenever I brought it up. Madison was the beautiful one with her perfect blonde hair and bright blue eyes, while I had mousy brown hair and was awkward through most of my teenage years. She was the social butterfly, the homecoming queen, the one who could charm anyone within minutes of meeting them. I was quieter, more academic, and preferred books to parties. In our family, there was a strong tradition of parents saving for their daughters' weddings. It wasn't just something my parents decided to do, it was a value passed down from my grandparents. My mom would often talk about how her parents had saved for her wedding, and it was important to her to do the same for her daughters. I remember sitting on my bed at around 8 years old when my mom showed me a special savings account booklet. "This is your wedding fund, Hazel," she said, pointing to the growing balance. "Someday, when you meet the right person, this will help give you the wedding of your dreams. Your father and I add to it every month." I remember feeling so special and loved in that moment. Over the years, they continued to mention the fund. On my 16th birthday, my dad handed me an envelope with a statement showing the account balance of nearly $30,000. "It's growing, just like you," he said with a smile. "By the time you're ready to get married, it'll be enough for any wedding you could want." Similar conversations happened on my 18th birthday, college graduation, and other significant milestones. They had promised the same to Madison, of course, though I never saw her express much interest in the topic. As I grew up, I developed into someone who was practical and responsible, especially with money. I worked part-time jobs throughout high school and college, saving most of what I earned. I graduated with a degree in accounting and found a good job at a local firm. I paid off my student loans within 3 years through careful budgeting and living with roommates to save on rent. My parents often praised my financial responsibility, telling other family members how proud they were of my independence. Madison took a different path. She studied communications in college, but switched majors twice, taking 5.5 years to graduate. After college, she bounced between jobs in marketing and PR, never staying anywhere longer than a year. She lived in expensive apartments she could barely afford and took lavish vacations on credit cards. Every few months, she'd call our parents in tears over some financial emergency, car repairs, medical bills, or simply running out of money before payday. And every time, our parents bailed her out. "Madison just hasn't found her footing yet," my mom would explain whenever I expressed frustration at this pattern. "She'll figure it out eventually." But eventually never seemed to come, and the bailouts continued well into our late 20s. I met Nathan 3 years ago through a mutual friend's birthday party. He wasn't someone I noticed right away. He was quietly helping the host set up food and drinks while everyone else was mingling. We ended up talking when I went to the kitchen to get some water, and I was immediately struck by how genuinely interested he seemed in our conversation. He asked thoughtful questions and really listened to my answers. Nathan works as a physical therapist and has the most amazing capacity for empathy I've ever seen. Where I can be analytical and sometimes overthink situations, he's intuitive and emotionally intelligent. We balance each other perfectly. He's taught me to be more present and open with my feelings, while I've helped him become more organized and goal-oriented. We share the same values about family, finances, and building a life together. After dating for 2.5 years, Nathan proposed during a weekend trip to the lake where I'd spent summers as a child. It wasn't an elaborate, Instagram-worthy proposal, just the two of us on a dock at sunset, with the simple ring that had belonged to his grandmother. It was perfect because it was so authentically us. As soon as we got engaged 6 months ago, I started thinking about wedding plans. Nothing extravagant. I've never been the type to dream of a princess ball gown or releasing doves at the ceremony. But I did want a meaningful celebration with our loved ones, good food, and maybe a live band since Nathan and I both love music. I started researching venues and was shocked at how expensive everything was, but I felt comfort knowing we had the wedding fund to help. Nathan and I are both savers by nature, and we've been putting money aside for our future home and eventually starting a family. We didn't want to deplete those savings for a one-day celebration, no matter how special. The wedding fund my parents had promised would allow us to have a lovely wedding without compromising our financial goals. I felt so grateful knowing that my parents' decades of saving would help us start our married life on solid financial footing. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. All those years of promises were about to evaporate in a single conversation that would change my relationship with my family forever. With our engagement official and a tentative date in mind for the following spring, Nathan and I started getting serious about wedding planning. We spent evenings after work looking at venues online, creating spreadsheets of potential vendors, and discussing what elements were most important to us. We wanted something meaningful but not ostentatious, a celebration that reflected our values and relationship. I think we should set a firm budget before we get too deep into planning, Nathan suggested one night as we sat at our kitchen table surrounded by bridal magazines and printouts. That way we won't fall in love with something we can't afford. I nodded, feeling that familiar warmth of appreciation for his practicality. You're right. Let me call my parents tomorrow and see when we can sit down with them to discuss accessing the wedding fund. Once we know exactly what we're working with, we can finalize our budget. The next day, I called my mom and asked if we could come over for dinner that weekend to talk about wedding plans and the fund. There was a slight pause before she agreed, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I was excited to finally move forward with concrete plans after years of saving and months of preliminary research. That Saturday, Nathan and I arrived at my parents' house with a wedding planning binder I'd put together. My mom had made her famous lasagna, and my dad had opened a bottle of wine, all signs of a celebration. But looking back, I should have noticed the tension in their smiles and how they avoided the topic of the wedding throughout dinner, steering the conversation toward neutral subjects like Nathan's work and my parents' upcoming anniversary trip. After dinner, we moved to the living room with coffee and the dessert Nathan had brought, a cheesecake from my favorite bakery. I pulled out my binder, ready to discuss our initial ideas and timelines. Before we get into the details, I said, we wanted to talk about the wedding fund. We're trying to set our budget, and knowing exactly what we have to work with would really help our planning. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. My dad cleared his throat and set down his coffee cup. My mom suddenly became very interested in smoothing a non-existent wrinkle in her pants. Hazel, honey, my dad finally said, his voice unusually hesitant. There's something we need to tell you about the fund. I felt a slight twist in my stomach but pushed it aside. Is everything okay? Did the market take a hit or something? I tried to joke, thinking maybe the amount was less than they'd hoped due to investment performance. No, nothing like that, my mom jumped in, her voice slightly higher than normal. It's just that, well, we've made a decision regarding that money. The twist in my stomach tightened. What kind of decision? My dad looked me directly in the eyes. We gave the money to Madison and Jack for a down payment on their house. They found their dream home but couldn't qualify for the mortgage without a larger down payment. They really needed the help. The words hit me like a physical blow. I literally felt the air leave my lungs, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. Nathan's hand found mine and squeezed gently, his touch anchoring me as the room seemed to tilt. You, what? I finally managed. The entire wedding fund? The money you've been promising me my entire life. Honey, try to understand, my mom pleaded. Madison and Jack were going to lose the house. The sellers had another offer, and they needed to move quickly. They really needed the money more than I do? I interrupted, my voice rising. More than the purpose you specifically saved it for over the last 29 years? It's just a wedding, Hazel, my dad said, his tone taking on that familiar lecturing quality I'd heard directed at Madison during her financial crises, but never at me before. One day versus a home they'll live in for years. We thought you of all people would understand the practicality of that. Of all people? I repeated. What does that mean? You're so good with money, my mom explained, as if this was a compliment rather than an excuse. You and Nathan are both so responsible. Madison has always struggled financially, and this was their chance to finally have some stability. I felt heat rising to my face as anger and humiliation battled within me. So I'm being punished for being responsible? While Madison gets rewarded for years of financial irresponsibility. Nobody's being punished, my dad said firmly. We're just trying to help both our daughters in the ways they need it most. By breaking a promise you've been making to me my entire life? My voice cracked. Did you even consider asking me first? Or giving me part of the fund at least? We knew you'd be disappointed, my mom said softly, but we hoped you'd see that this was the right decision for the family as a whole. I looked at Nathan, who had been silent but whose expression showed clearly that he was as shocked as I was. His face was pale, his jaw tight with controlled emotion. Did Madison know? I asked suddenly. Did she know that money was meant for my wedding? My parents exchanged another look, and I had my answer before they spoke. She was reluctant at first, my dad admitted. But we convinced her that this was the best use of the money. A hollow laugh escaped me. So even Madison knew this was wrong, but you pushed her to take it anyway? That's not fair, Hazel, my mom said, her voice hardening. Madison and Jack were about to lose their dream home. What would you have had us do? I don't know, Mom. Maybe keep the promise you've been making to me since I was a child? Maybe expect my 31-year-old sister to have saved for her own down payment instead of bailing her out again. My dad's expression darkened. I think you're being selfish right now. Your sister needed help. The accusation selfish hit me like a slap. I stood up abruptly, grabbing my wedding binder. I need to go. I can't have this conversation right now. Nathan stood with me, placing a steadying hand on my back. I think that's a good idea. We all need time to process this. The drive home was painfully silent. I stared out the window, tears streaming down my face that I didn't even try to wipe away. Nathan drove carefully, one hand on the wheel and the other holding mine across the console. When we finally got home, the dam broke completely. I collapsed onto our couch, sobbing with the kind of raw, gasping cries I hadn't experienced since childhood. Nathan held me through it, not offering empty reassurances, just being present in my pain. I can't believe they did this, I said when I could finally speak again. All those years of promises, just gone. And then to call me selfish for being upset about it. It's not right, Nathan agreed, his voice gentle but firm. You have every reason to be hurt and angry. What are we going to do about the wedding? I asked, the practical part of my brain somehow still functioning through the emotional storm. We'll figure it out, he assured me. We have savings. Maybe not what we hoped for, but enough for something meaningful. The important thing is that we're getting married, with or without their help. His words comforted me, but they couldn't erase the deep sense of betrayal I felt. This wasn't just about money, it was about the message my parents had sent about who deserved their support and whose dreams mattered more. That night, I barely slept, replaying the conversation over and over, thinking of all the things I should have said and wondering how I would ever face my family again. After 3 days of emotional turmoil, cycling through shock, grief, anger, and disbelief, I decided I needed to talk to my parents again. The initial conversation had ended so abruptly, with so many things left unsaid, that it felt like an open wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Nathan offered to come with me, but I felt this was something I needed to do alone. "Are you sure?" he asked as I grabbed my car keys. "I don't mind being there for support." "I'm sure," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I think they'll be more honest if it's just me. Less defensive." I'd texted my mom that morning to make sure they would be home, saying simply that we needed to finish our conversation. She responded with a terse, "We'll be here," which didn't exactly set a promising tone. The 15-minute drive to my parents' house gave me time to rehearse what I wanted to say. I'd spent hours thinking about how to express my feelings without letting the conversation devolve into accusations and defensiveness. I wanted them to understand my pain without dismissing it as selfishness. When I arrived, my dad was working in the garden, a typical weekend activity for him. He straightened up when he saw my car, wiping his hands on his jeans and offering a tentative wave. I returned it half-heartedly as I got out of the car. "Mom inside?" I asked, skipping any warm greeting. "In the kitchen," he replied, following me toward the house. "Making coffee." We found my mother arranging cookies on a plate, a peace offering, perhaps. She looked up when we entered, her smile strained. "I made your favorite," she said, nodding toward the chocolate chip cookies. "And there's coffee brewing." "Thanks, but I'm not hungry," I said, sitting at the kitchen table. "I came to talk, not to eat cookies and pretend everything is fine." My parents exchanged a look before sitting down across from me. The familiar kitchen where I'd spent so many happy hours now felt like foreign territory. "I've had some time to process what you told me," I began, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "And I'm still hurt and confused. I don't understand how you could promise me something for my entire life and then give it away without even talking to me first." "Hazel," my dad started, "we understand you're disappointed." "Disappointed doesn't begin to cover it, Dad," I interrupted. "I feel betrayed. This isn't about the money itself. It's about what it represents. You taught me my whole life about keeping promises and being responsible with money, and then you did exactly the opposite." My mother sighed. "It's just a wedding, Hazel. One day. Madison needed this for a home she'll live in for years. Can't you see the difference?" Her dismissal of my feelings stung all over again. "It's not just a wedding, Mom. It's the promise you made. It's the fact that you've been bailing Madison out her entire adult life, while I've worked hard to be financially responsible. And now when it's finally my turn for the one thing you promised me, you give it to her instead." "We're comfortable financially, but we're not made of money," my father said defensively. "We couldn't fund both your wedding and Madison's house." "Did you even ask her to eventually pay you back?" I questioned, suddenly realizing this hadn't come up in our previous conversation. The silence and averted gazes told me everything. "So it was a gift," I concluded. "The money that was supposed to be for my wedding is now just a gift to Madison and Jack. They're family," my mom said weakly. "We don't expect them to pay us back." "I'm family too," I said, my voice cracking slightly. Or at least I thought I was. Just then, the back door opened and Madison walked in, stopping short when she saw me. Her eyes widened in surprise, darting between me and our parents. "Oh," she said. "I didn't know you were coming over today, Hazel." "Clearly," I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Madison set down her purse and hesitantly joined us at the table. She was wearing new clothes I hadn't seen before, and I couldn't help wondering if my wedding fund had paid for them too. "I guess you're here about the money," she said quietly. "Yes, the money that was promised to me my entire life and that you knew was for my wedding," I confirmed. Madison at least had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm sorry, Hazel. I really am. I didn't want to take it at first, but the house was perfect, and we were going to lose it, and Mom and Dad insisted." "You could have said no," I pointed out. "You knew what that money was for." "Would you have said no?" she challenged. "If they offered you the money for something you desperately wanted? The difference is, it was already promised to me. It wasn't theirs to offer to you." "Girls, please," my mother interjected. "This isn't helping anything." "Mom's right," Madison said. "What's done is done. I am sorry you're hurt, but Jack and I deserved this chance at our dream home." Her word choice made my blood boil. Deserved? What exactly have you done to deserve a $60,000 handout? You've been financially irresponsible your entire adult life. You've never held a job longer than a year. You take expensive vacations you can't afford. And somehow you deserve my wedding fund. That's enough, my father said sharply. This kind of attack isn't fair. Fair? I laughed incredulously. You want to talk to me about fair? Hazel, you're being selfish, my mother said, her voice rising. Madison and Jack needed this money in a way you and Nathan don't. You're both successful with good jobs. You'll be fine. So again, I'm being punished for being responsible while Madison gets rewarded for the opposite. No one is being punished, my father insisted. We're just trying to help both our daughters in different ways. You haven't helped me at all, I pointed out. You've taken something away from me. This is why Madison has always been easier to love, my mother snapped, then immediately covered her mouth, as if she could take back the words. The room went deadly silent. I felt as if all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. My father looked shocked at her outburst, and Madison stared down at the table, not meeting anyone's eyes. Hazel, she didn't mean that, my father said quickly. But I was already standing up, grabbing my purse with shaking hands. I think she did. And I think this conversation is over. Please, honey, sit down, my mother pleaded, reaching for my arm. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I pulled away from her touch. But you thought it. You've probably always thought it. And now at least I know where I stand. I walked out without looking back, ignoring their calls for me to return. I made it to my car before the tears started, blurring my vision so badly that I had to sit there for several minutes before I could safely drive. About 5 miles from my parents' house, the tears became so overwhelming that I had to pull over onto the shoulder of the road. I sat there with my hazard lights blinking, sobbing like I hadn't since I was a child. Easier to love. The words kept echoing in my head, confirming a fear I'd harbored since childhood but never fully acknowledged. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and called Nathan. They said I was being selfish, I choked out when he answered. My mom said, she said Madison was easier to love. All this time, I thought I was imagining the favoritism, but I wasn't. I wasn't. Where are you? Nathan asked, his voice filled with concern. Are you driving? Pulled over on Maple Road, I managed to say between sobs. Stay there. I'm coming to get you. We'll come back for your car later. 20 minutes later, Nathan's car pulled up behind mine. He got out and opened my door, gently helping me into the passenger seat of his vehicle. Without asking for details, he drove us home, one hand on the wheel and the other holding mine tightly. Only when we were safely home did he ask me to tell him everything that had happened. And as I recounted the painful conversation, including my mother's devastating slip, I watched his expression change from concern to anger on my behalf. You deserve better than this, he said finally, pulling me into a protective embrace. So much better. In that moment, held by someone who truly loved and valued me, I began to believe that maybe he was right. For the next 2 weeks, silence stretched between me and my family like a vast, empty desert. My phone remained notably quiet, no texts from my mom checking in, no calls from my dad asking if I needed help with anything around the apartment, as he usually did. The family group chat that normally buzzed with mundane updates and occasional funny memes was dormant. I wasn't the one who told extended family what had happened, but news travels fast. My cousin Samantha called me 3 days after the confrontation. Is it true? She asked without preamble. Aunt Carol and Uncle David gave Madison your wedding fund for a house? Who told you that? I asked, surprised that the news had spread so quickly. Madison posted photos of her new house on Facebook, tagging your parents and thanking them for the generous gift that made their dream home possible. People are talking. I hadn't even seen the post. I'd been avoiding social media, knowing it would only make me feel worse. After hanging up with Samantha, curiosity got the better of me, and I logged into Facebook. There it was, Madison standing proudly in front of a beautiful craftsman-style house, her husband's arm around her waist, both beaming with happiness. The caption read, "Dreams do come true. Endless thanks to Mom and Dad for the incredible gift that made this possible. We couldn't have done it without you." Hashtag first-time homeowners, hashtag dream home, hashtag blessed. The comments section was filled with congratulations, including effusive responses from my parents about how happy they were to help their beautiful daughter and son-in-law start this new chapter. There was no mention of where the money had come from. No acknowledgement of what had been taken from me. I closed the app, feeling sick to my stomach. As days passed, family members and mutual friends began taking sides. Most of my aunts and uncles seemed to think I was overreacting, that as the financially stable sister, I should be happy for Madison. My grandmother, however, called me privately to say she understood my hurt and was disappointed in my parents' decision. "A promise is a promise," she said firmly. "Your grandfather and I would never have done that to either of our children." Some of my friends were outraged on my behalf, while others suggested I should be the bigger person and move past it for the sake of family harmony. Madison's friends, predictably, thought I was being dramatic about just money. The one unexpected source of support came from Nathan's parents. When we told them what had happened during a Sunday dinner at their modest home, Nathan's mother was visibly upset. "We don't have much," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, "but we'd like to contribute $5,000 to your wedding. It's not close to what you lost, but it's something." I was moved to tears by their generosity, especially knowing they weren't in a financial position to easily spare that amount. After some discussion with Nathan, we gratefully accepted their offer, though we insisted it be considered a loan that we would repay when we could. Meanwhile, wedding planning continued, but now with a drastically reduced budget. Instead of the elegant venue by the lake that we'd been considering, we started looking at community centers and public parks. The live band we dreamed of was replaced with plans for a playlist and rented speakers. The guest list, originally around 150 people, was cut in half. Every revision felt like another small loss, another reminder of my parents' betrayal. I tried to stay positive for Nathan's sake, but he could see right through my forced smiles. "We can postpone if you want," he suggested one night as we sat surrounded by budget spreadsheets and crossed-out vendor lists. "Give ourselves more time to save." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not letting what they did delay our happiness. We'll make it work." But privately, I was struggling more than I let on. I found it hard to concentrate at work, making uncharacteristic errors that earned me concerned looks from my supervisor. I lost interest in hobbies I'd previously enjoyed. Sleep became elusive, with nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying my mother's words, "easier to love," and wondering if that had always been true. Nathan tried his best to support me, but I could tell he was worried. He'd gently suggest I talk to someone professional about my feelings, but I'd brush him off, insisting I was fine, just stressed about wedding planning. The truth was, I didn't want to admit how deeply my parents' actions had wounded me, how fundamentally it had shaken my understanding of my place in our family. About 3 weeks after the confrontation, my phone lit up with a text from Madison. "Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? Just the two of us. Please." I stared at the message for a long time before showing it to Nathan. "What do you think? Should I go?" He considered it carefully. "It might help to hear what she has to say. But only if you feel ready." I wasn't sure I was ready, but the alternative, continuing in this painful limbo, seemed worse. So I agreed to meet Madison at a coffee shop halfway between our homes, neutral territory where neither of us would have the home field advantage. The night before our meeting, I barely slept, mentally rehearsing what I wanted to say, imagining her possible responses, and trying to prepare myself for any scenario. By the time I parked outside the coffee shop the next afternoon, I felt emotionally exhausted, but determined to maintain my composure no matter what. Madison was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of her. She'd ordered my usual latte, a peace offering that reminded me of how long we'd known each other, how many shared memories and inside jokes we had despite our differences. For a moment, I felt a pang of longing for the uncomplicated relationship we'd had as children, before adult responsibilities and financial decisions came between us. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm cup but not drinking yet. An awkward silence stretched between us, both of us unsure how to bridge the chasm that had opened in our relationship. How's the wedding planning going? Madison finally asked, then immediately winced. Sorry, that was stupid to ask. It's going, I replied flatly. Lots of changes to our original plans, as you might imagine. She nodded, looking down at her coffee. Hazel, I really am sorry about the money. I shouldn't have accepted it. But you did, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. You knew what that money was for, and you took it anyway. Mom and Dad said they wanted to help us. That it was their money to use how they thought best. She took a deep breath. They showed us the house listing after we mentioned we were starting to look at properties. They said it was perfect for us, and that they wanted to help make it happen. And you didn't think to say, hey, isn't that Hazel's wedding fund you've been promising her since childhood? Madison's cheeks flushed. I did bring that up, actually. Dad said they had always intended to help both of us when we needed it most, and right now, this was what we needed. Did you need it, though? I challenged. Did you actually need a 2,500 square foot house with a gourmet kitchen and 3-car garage? Or could you have found something more modest that you could afford on your own? She had the grace to look embarrassed. We could have qualified for a mortgage without their help, but for a much smaller house in a less desirable neighborhood. This house, it was everything we wanted. So you took what was promised to me because you wanted a nicer house than you could afford on your own. I shook my head in disbelief. Do you realize how that sounds? When you put it that way, it sounds terrible, Madison admitted. But Mom and Dad really pushed for us to accept. They made it seem like they had always intended the money to be flexible, to help whoever needed it most at any given time. That's not what they told me for 29 years, I countered. They specifically called it my wedding fund every time they mentioned it. Madison took a sip of her coffee, avoiding my eyes. I think they always favored me, she said quietly. I've known it since we were kids, and I felt guilty about it, but I also benefited from it. I'm not proud of that. Her admission took me by surprise. I'd expected defensiveness, not this acknowledgement of the family dynamic I'd felt but could never prove. Why do you think they favored you? I asked, genuinely curious. Madison shrugged, looking uncomfortable. I don't know. Maybe because I'm more like Mom, social, emotional. You were always Dad's favorite anyway, with your matching analytical minds and Sunday pancake ritual. I almost laughed at how differently we had experienced the same childhood. I never felt like Dad's favorite. I always thought he was disappointed that I wasn't more outgoing like you. Are you kidding? He bragged about you constantly. Hazel made the honor roll again. Hazel is so responsible with money. Hazel never gives us any trouble. She mimicked our father's proud tone. Meanwhile, I was the one always screwing up, always needing help. But they always came through for you, I pointed out. Every time you needed money, they were there. Every time you had a crisis, they dropped everything to help you. Do you know how many times they've helped me financially as an adult? 0. Because I made sure I never needed it until now for the one thing they had explicitly promised me. Madison was quiet for a moment. You've always been the smart one, the responsible one, the one who had it all together. Do you have any idea what it's like living in that shadow? Always being compared and coming up short. Her words stunned me. All these years, I'd envied her for being the favored child, never realizing she might have been envying me for other reasons. This isn't about childhood jealousies, I said, trying to refocus the conversation. This is about you and our parents taking something that was promised to me. You're right, Madison conceded. And I am sorry. If I could undo it, I would. But the money's gone, Hazel. It's been spent on the down payment, closing costs, some new furniture. She trailed off, perhaps realizing that listing all the things my wedding fund had purchased for her wasn't helping her case. So what now? I asked. You wanted this meeting. What did you hope to accomplish? I was hoping we could find a way forward, she said. I miss my sister. Mom and Dad are miserable. The whole family feels fractured. That's not on me, I said firmly. I'm not the one who broke promises and betrayed trust. No, you're not, she agreed. But you're the only one who can decide if you're willing to forgive us. I picked up my barely touched latte and stood. I'm not ready for that conversation yet. Maybe someday, but not today. As I walked to my car, memories of childhood summers spent playing with Madison in our backyard sprinkler system flashed through my mind. Of braiding each other's hair before school. of her defending me against a middle school bully. We had been close once, before adults see. The coffee shop Madison had chosen for our meeting was a local place called Groundwork, about 15 minutes from both our homes. It was neutral territory. Neither of us had particular memories or associations with it, which I appreciated. The place had an industrial vibe with exposed brick walls, hanging Edison bulbs, and reclaimed wood furniture. It was busy but not overcrowded, with enough ambient noise to provide privacy without having to whisper. Madison arrived before me, which was unusual given her perpetual lateness. She'd secured a corner table and already ordered 2 drinks, a regular latte for herself and a vanilla latte for me. It was the drink I'd favored since college, and the fact that she remembered such a small detail made an unwelcome crack in my armor of anger. I slid into the chair across from her, noticing how tired she looked despite her carefully applied makeup. There were shadows under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide, and a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there at our parents' house. "Thanks for meeting me," Madison said, pushing my drink across the table. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm cup but not drinking yet. The familiar aroma of vanilla and espresso wafted up, comforting despite the uncomfortable situation. An awkward silence stretched between us. Madison fidgeted with her cup sleeve, tearing little strips from the edge. I remembered her doing the same thing with paper napkins when we were kids, and she was nervous about something, a test, a recital, telling our parents about a broken vase. "How's the wedding planning going?" she finally asked, then immediately winced. "Sorry, that was stupid to ask." "It's going," I replied flatly. "Lots of changes to our original plans, as you might imagine." She nodded, looking down at her coffee. The sunlight from the nearby window caught her hair, turning it golden in a way that reminded me sharply of our mother. I'd always envied Madison's hair, blonde and naturally straight, while mine was brown and perpetually frizzy unless I spent significant time with styling products. "Hazel, I really am sorry about the money," Madison said, her voice small but seemingly sincere. "I shouldn't have accepted it." "But you did," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "You knew what that money was for, and you took it anyway. Mom and Dad said they wanted to help us, that it was their money to use how they thought best." She took a deep breath, her fingers still working on destroying the coffee sleeve. "They showed us the house listing after we mentioned we were starting to look at properties. They said it was perfect for us, and that they wanted to help make it happen. And you didn't think to say, 'Hey, isn't that Hazel's wedding fund you've been promising her since childhood?'" Madison's cheeks flushed pink. "I did bring that up, actually. Dad said they had always intended to help both of us when we needed it most, and right now, this was what we needed." "Did you need it, though?" I challenged, leaning forward slightly. "Did you actually need a 2,500 square foot house with a gourmet kitchen and 3-car garage? Or could you have found something more modest that you could afford on your own?" She had the grace to look embarrassed. "We could have qualified for a mortgage without their help, but for a much smaller house in a less desirable neighborhood. This house, it was everything we wanted. So you took what was promised to me because you wanted a nicer house than you could afford on your own." I shook my head in disbelief. "Do you realize how that sounds?" "When you put it that way, it sounds terrible," Madison admitted, abandoning the shredded cup sleeve and meeting my eyes. "But Mom and Dad really pushed for us to accept. They made it seem like they had always intended the money to be flexible, to help whoever needed it most at any given time." "That's not what they told me for 29 years, I countered, my voice rising slightly before I caught myself and lowered it again. "They specifically called it my wedding fund every time they mentioned it." After a long pause, Madison pulled out her phone. "Do you want to see the house? I have pictures of what we've done so far." The abrupt change of subject caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to refuse, to not give her the satisfaction of showing off what my wedding fund had bought. But another part was morbidly curious. "Sure," I said tightly. "Why not?" Madison brightened, clearly relieved to move away from the tension of our previous conversation. She scooted her chair around so we were sitting side by side and began scrolling through photos on her phone. "This is the living room," she said, showing me a space with vaulted ceilings and a stone fireplace. "We just got the sectional delivered last week." And this is the kitchen. The previous owners renovated it right before listing, so all the appliances are brand new. I nodded stiffly as she continued through a tour of the house that should never have been hers at my expense. Master bedroom with ensuite bath. Guest rooms. Home office. Backyard with a deck and fire pit. Each photo was like salt in an open wound. "It's beautiful," I said when she finally finished, my voice carefully neutral. "You and Jack must be very happy there." "We are," she said, then added hastily, "but I feel awful about how we got it." "I really do, Hazel." "Did you know?" I asked suddenly. "About the wedding fund, I mean. Did you know about it all along?" Madison hesitated, and I knew the answer before she spoke. "Yes," she admitted. "Mom mentioned it to me when I was about 10, I think. She showed me the account statement for mine and said there was one for you too. So all those years, you knew they were saving that money specifically for my wedding?" She nodded, looking miserable. "I did. And you took it anyway." "I shouldn't have," she whispered. "But they were so insistent, and the house was so perfect, and Jack was so excited." She trailed off, perhaps realizing that none of these were adequate justifications. "You know what the worst part is?" I said, anger bubbling up again. "It's not even really about the money. It's about what it represents. My entire life, you've been the favorite. You've gotten special treatment, more attention, more help, more of everything. And I accepted that because at least I had this one thing that was promised to me. And then you took that too." "That's not fair," Madison protested, her own anger flaring. "You were always the golden child academically. You never got in trouble. You always made the right decisions. Do you have any idea what it's like growing up with a perfect sister?" I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Perfect? I worked my ass off for every achievement while things seemed to come easily to you. You were beautiful, popular, the social butterfly everyone adored. I was the awkward bookworm who didn't get invited to parties. And you think that made me happy?" Madison's voice rose. "Being valued only for my looks and personality while you got praised for your brains and responsibility? At least your achievements were something real, something you earned." "What did I have? Being pretty? Being fun at parties? Those aren't accomplishments, Hazel." We stared at each other, both breathing hard, both realizing perhaps for the first time how completely different our perceptions of our shared childhood had been. "It's not a competition," I said finally, though a lifetime of comparison had made it feel exactly like that. "Isn't it, though?" Madison asked quietly. "It always has been, even if we didn't choose it. Mom and Dad set it up that way, whether they meant to or not." She wasn't entirely wrong, and that realization made me uncomfortable. Our parents had always compared us, subtly and not so subtly. Madison was the pretty one, the social one, the one who needed help and protection. I was the smart one, the responsible one, the one who could take care of herself. We'd been cast in these roles so early that we'd internalized them, built our identities around them. "I envied you," Madison said suddenly. "Your relationship with Nathan. How solid it is, how you both seem so sure about each other. Jack and I, it's more complicated. We love each other, but we fight a lot. About money, mainly." She gave a humorless laugh. "Ironic, right? We get this amazing financial gift, and we're still fighting about money." I didn't know what to say to this unexpected confession. Madison and Jack had always seemed like the perfect couple on social media, attractive, fun-loving, constantly having adventures. It had never occurred to me that they might have serious problems beneath the carefully curated surface. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it despite everything. "That must be hard." Madison shrugged, blinking rapidly against sudden tears. "It's fine. We'll figure it out. We always do." She tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Anyway, this isn't about my marriage problems. I asked you here because I want to try to make things right between us." "How?" I asked bluntly. "The money's spent. The trust is broken. What exactly do you think you can do to fix this?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I just know I miss my sister. Growing up, even with all the comparison and competition, you were still my best friend. Remember when we built that blanket fort in the living room during that thunderstorm when the power went out? Or when we snuck out to see that concert in high school and nearly got caught? The memories brought an unwelcome lump to my throat. For all our differences and jealousies, Madison and I had shared moments of genuine connection and complicity throughout our childhood. In those moments, the roles assigned to us by our parents fell away, and we were just sisters who loved each other. I remember, I said softly. I don't want to lose that, Madison said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I don't want to lose you. I pulled my hand away gently but firmly. I'm not ready to forgive and forget, Madison. What you and our parents did hurt me deeply, and a coffee and some apologies aren't going to erase that. She nodded, disappointment clear on her face, but also understanding. I know. I just hoped we could start the process. Maybe someday, I said, standing and gathering my purse. But not today. As I walked to my car, memories cascaded through my mind. Madison teaching me to French braid hair before my first school dance, me helping her study for her history final when she was panicking about failing, us sharing a bottle of wine and laughing until we cried the night before she moved into her first apartment. We had been close once, before adult complications and parental favoritism drove a wedge between us. Now I wondered if that relationship could ever be repaired, or if the damage done was simply too great to overcome. The day after my difficult meeting with Madison, I received an unexpected text from Nathan's sister, Emma. We'd always gotten along well, but weren't particularly close. She was a few years younger than Nathan and lived in Chicago, so we only saw each other a few times a year at family gatherings. Heard about what happened with your parents and sister, her message read. I'm in town for a conference this weekend. Want to grab lunch Saturday? Sometimes an outside perspective helps. I was touched by her reaching out and agreed to meet. That Saturday, we met at a small bistro downtown. Emma arrived in her typical whirlwind fashion, her dark curls bouncing as she rushed in, apologizing for being 5 minutes late. Conference ran over, she explained, sliding into the booth across from me. How are you holding up? I appreciated that she didn't start with small talk or pretend we were just having a casual lunch. I've been better, I admitted. It's been a roller coaster. I bet. Nathan told me the basics, but I'd like to hear your side if you're comfortable sharing. Over soup and salad, I recounted the whole painful saga, the discovery, the confrontations, the painful words exchanged, and my conflicted feelings after meeting with Madison. Emma listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just letting me talk. When I finally finished, she was quiet for a moment, considering. That's a tough situation, she said finally. Family stuff is always complicated, but this is especially messy. What would you do? I asked. If you were in my position? Emma tilted her head thoughtfully. Honestly, I'd be just as hurt and angry as you are. But I'd also try to separate the different issues at play here. What do you mean? Well, there's the money itself, which is obviously significant. Then there's the broken promise, which might be even more hurtful. And underneath it all, there's this lifelong dynamic of favoritism and different treatment between you and Madison. I nodded, surprised by her insight. That's exactly it. The money is gone, Emma continued pragmatically. That sucks, but it's a fact. The wedding you planned isn't happening the way you envisioned. But that doesn't mean you can't have a meaningful wedding that truly reflects you and Nathan. We're trying to figure that out, I acknowledged. But it's hard not to feel resentful every time we have to cut something from our plans. I get that. But here's a perspective to consider. 10 years from now, what will matter more? The specifics of your wedding day or the health of your family relationships? It was a pointed question, but I could tell it came from a place of caring rather than judgment. I don't know, I answered honestly. Right now, it all hurts too much to think that far ahead. Emma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That's totally fair. You don't have to decide anything right now. Just keep the question in mind as you move forward. Her words stayed with me over the next few days, particularly when I attended my first therapy session that following Tuesday. I'd finally taken Nathan's advice to talk to a professional, finding a therapist named Dr. Chin who specialized in family dynamics. Family betrayals cut especially deep, Dr. Chin observed after I'd shared my story. These are the people who are supposed to have your back unconditionally. Exactly, I said, relieved to be truly understood. and now I don't know how to move forward. Do I forgive them? Cut them off? Somewhere in between. Those are big questions, she replied. Before we tackle them, I'm curious about something. What would a meaningful wedding look like to you and Nathan, regardless of budget? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on what we were losing that I hadn't really considered this fundamental question. I guess, something that reflects who we are as a couple. Something intimate and authentic, surrounded by people who genuinely support us. Good food, good music, meaningful vows. I paused, realizing something. Actually, none of those core elements necessarily require a huge budget. Dr. Chin smiled slightly. That's an interesting realization. Don't get me wrong, I added quickly. I'm still hurt and angry about what my parents did. But maybe the wedding itself doesn't have to be a casualty of their betrayal. Over the next 2 weeks, therapy sessions combined with heart-to-heart conversations with Nathan helped me gain clarity. I began to see that while I couldn't control my parents' actions or decisions, I could control my response to them. I could choose not to let their betrayal define my wedding or my future happiness. With this new mindset, Nathan and I sat down one evening to completely reimagine our wedding plans from scratch. Instead of starting with what we couldn't afford, we focused on what would make the day meaningful to us. What matters most to you about this wedding? Nathan asked as we sat at our kitchen table with fresh notebooks, deliberately setting aside all our previous plans. Promising myself to you in front of the people who truly love and support us, I replied without hesitation. Good food, some dancing, and photographs to remember it by. What about you? Having my grandfather perform the ceremony, he said. His grandfather was a retired minister who had been a central figure in Nathan's life. And maybe a killer first dance song. We smiled at each other, feeling a weight lifting. This approach felt right, focusing on meaning rather than appearances, substance rather than show. The next day, I received a surprise email from my boss. Subject line, a little something for the wedding. Hazel, it read, the team wanted to do something special for your upcoming wedding. We know it's not traditional for coworkers to give financial gifts, but we've all noticed how stressed you've seemed lately, and Nathan mentioned some family complications with your wedding plans when he stopped by last week. We've taken up a collection. Please accept this with our best wishes and know how valued you are here. Attached was a confirmation of a $3,000 transfer to my account. I burst into tears at my desk, overwhelmed by this unexpected generosity. When I called Nathan to tell him, he had news of his own. Emma just called, he said. She's offering us her rewards points for our honeymoon hotel. She's been traveling for work for years and never uses them. She says it's enough for a week at almost any Marriott property. These acts of kindness continued to accumulate. My college roommate Jessica, now a talented baker, offered to make our wedding cake as her gift. Nathan's cousin, a professional DJ, volunteered his services for the reception. My friend Marcus, who worked at a local brewery, arranged for a discount on drinks. Perhaps the most surprising offer came from Nathan himself. One night, as we were reviewing our revised wedding budget, he looked up from his laptop with a determined expression. I've been thinking, he said. What if we use the money we've been saving for our honeymoon for the wedding instead? We could postpone the honeymoon for our first anniversary. Are you sure? I asked, touched by the offer but hesitant to accept. You've been looking forward to that trip to Costa Rica for months. The trip can wait, he said firmly. What matters is that we have a wedding day that feels right, not one defined by your parents' actions. His unwavering support throughout this ordeal had only deepened my love for him. While my faith in my parents had been shaken, my confidence in our relationship had grown stronger. We were facing this challenge as a team, finding solutions together rather than allowing it to drive us apart. With our revised budget, creative cost-cutting, and the generous help of friends and family, a new wedding vision began to take shape. We found a charming local farm that rented their apple orchard for ceremonies at a fraction of what the lakeside venue would have cost. A food truck owned by our favorite local restaurant agreed to cater at a reasonable price. Nathan's musically gifted coworkers offered to play acoustic guitar for the ceremony. The wedding wouldn't be what I had originally envisioned, but it was beginning to feel more authentically us than the more conventional celebration we'd been planning. As I regained my emotional footing and our new wedding plans came together, I realized I needed to address the situation with my parents. Avoidance hadn't been healing the rift, and while I wasn't ready for full reconciliation, the complete severing of communication wasn't helping anyone. After discussing it with Dr. Chin and Nathan, I decided to write my parents a letter. Not an angry accusation, but an honest expression of my feelings and a first step toward possible healing. Dear Mom and Dad, I wrote one evening, choosing my words carefully. It's been over a month since our conversation about the wedding fund, and while I'm still deeply hurt by what happened, I feel it's time to share my thoughts more clearly than I was able to in the heat of the moment. When you gave my wedding fund to Madison, it wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, promises, and feeling valued in our family. For years, I've worked hard to be responsible, independent, and self-sufficient, qualities you taught me to value. Yet when it came time for the one financial help I had been promised, those same qualities seemed to count against me. I want you to understand that my hurt comes from feeling that my special day, and by extension, my happiness, was considered less important than Madison's desires. The money itself, while significant, isn't the core issue. The message sent by your decision is what cut the deepest. Nathan and I are moving forward with planning a wedding that reflects our values and priorities. It will be different than what we originally envisioned, but meaningful nonetheless. I'm writing not to ask for anything, but to open the door to better understanding between us. I miss the relationship we used to have, even as I'm learning to establish healthier boundaries. I'm not ready for things to return to normal as if nothing happened, but I am open to beginning a conversation about how we move forward from here. Love, Hazel. I read the letter to Nathan before sending it, wanting his perspective. It's perfect, he said. Honest, but not attacking. It leaves the door open without minimizing what happened. I mailed the letter the next day, feeling both anxious and relieved to have expressed my feelings in a measured way. 3 days later, my phone pinged with a text from my father. We got your letter. Thank you for reaching out. We'd like to talk when you're ready. We love you. It wasn't an apology, and it didn't address the substance of my letter, but it was an acknowledgement, a start, perhaps, to a new chapter in our relationship. I showed the message to Nathan, who put his arm around me supportively. What do you think? He asked. Do you want to talk to them? I thought about Emma's question, what would matter more 10 years from now, and Dr. Chen's insights about family dynamics and healing. Yes, I decided. Not right away, but soon. I think it's time. As I placed my phone down, I felt a subtle shift within myself, a realization that regardless of how things unfolded with my family, I was creating a new family with Nathan, one based on mutual respect, trust, and genuine support. The wedding fund betrayal had been painful, but it had also taught me valuable lessons about resilience, boundaries, and what truly matters in relationships. That night, as Nathan and I reviewed potential reception playlists, laughing at some of his more questionable music choices, I felt truly happy for the first time since the whole ordeal began. The wedding we were planning now felt more meaningful than the one we'd originally envisioned, not despite the challenges we'd faced, but in some ways because of them. A week after sending my letter, I finally agreed to meet with my parents at their home. Nathan offered to come with me, but I felt this was a conversation I needed to have alone, at least initially. The drive to their house was surreal, the familiar route now charged with anxiety and uncertainty. As I pulled into the driveway, I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the boundaries I'd set with Dr. Chen's help. My parents were waiting in the living room, the formal space reserved for important family discussions and holiday gatherings. The tension was palpable as I sat across from them, the coffee table between us like a demilitarized zone. Thank you for coming, my mother began, her hands fidgeting nervously with a tissue. And for your letter. It gave us a lot to think about. My father nodded, looking older and more tired than I remembered. Hazel, we need to acknowledge that we hurt you deeply. While we still believe we were helping both our daughters in the ways they needed, we handled it poorly. We should have discussed it with you before making the decision. It wasn't a complete admission of wrongdoing, but it was more than I'd expected. I could see the effort it took for my father, never comfortable with emotional conversations to make even this partial acknowledgement. "You broke a promise you made me my entire life," I said quietly but firmly. "And then you called me selfish for being upset about it. Do you understand why that was so painful?" My mother's eyes welled with tears. "I'm so sorry for saying what I did about Madison being easier to love. I didn't mean it. It was a horrible thing to say, and it's not true. But you said it," I pointed out. "And it confirmed what I've felt for years, that there's always been favoritism in our family. We've never meant to favor either of you," my father insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. "We've just tried to respond to your different needs. By constantly bailing Madison out financially while expecting me to handle everything on my own? By giving her my wedding fund because she wanted a bigger house than she could afford." My directness clearly made them uncomfortable, but I refused to back down or soften the reality of what had happened. After a long pause, my father sighed deeply. "Looking back, I can see how our actions created that impression. We've enabled Madison's financial irresponsibility instead of helping her develop better habits. And we've taken your responsibility for granted." It was the most honest admission I'd heard from him, and it caught me off guard. "We can't replace the wedding fund," my mother added. "Not all of it, anyway. But we'd like to contribute to specific wedding costs, the flowers, perhaps, or the photographer." The offer was both meaningful and insufficient, a pattern that seemed to define this entire conversation. They were trying, in their limited way, but still didn't fully grasp the depth of the breach of trust that had occurred. "I'll think about it," I said, neither accepting nor rejecting their offer. "But this isn't just about money. It's about respect and keeping promises. It's about treating both your daughters fairly, even if that means different things for each of us." "We understand," my father said, though I wasn't entirely convinced he did. "We want to do better, Hazel. We want to repair our relationship with you. That will take time," I told them honestly. "I'm willing to try, but things can't go back to how they were before. There need to be boundaries." We talked for nearly 2 hours, covering years of family dynamics, misunderstandings, and hurt feelings. It wasn't a miraculous reconciliation. Too much damage had been done for that, but it was a beginning. By the time I left, we had reached a tentative understanding. They would respect my boundaries, acknowledge the harm done, and we would slowly work on rebuilding trust. The following months were a balancing act of wedding planning, therapy sessions, and carefully navigated family interactions. Madison and I began texting occasionally, nothing deep, just small updates and cautious steps toward a new type of relationship. She and Jack came to our engagement party, which was awkward but civil. Through it all, the wedding plans continued to evolve. What had begun as a necessity, planning a wedding on a drastically reduced budget, became an opportunity to create something truly personal and meaningful. We found a stunning apple orchard willing to host our ceremony for a reasonable fee. My talented friend Elena designed simple but elegant invitations. Nathan's grandfather agreed to officiate, bringing his wisdom and warm presence to the ceremony. The actual wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, one of those perfect early autumn days with brilliant blue skies and just enough crispness in the air to make the world feel fresh and new. Getting ready in a small cottage on the orchard property, surrounded by my closest friends, I felt a surprising sense of peace. "You look beautiful," said my maid of honor, Sarah, as she helped secure my veil. It wasn't the designer gown I'd initially envisioned, but a lovely vintage dress I'd found at a consignment shop and had altered to fit perfectly. "Thanks," I smiled, studying my reflection. "I feel, right? Like this is exactly how today should be." The ceremony took place under an ancient apple tree, its branches heavy with ripening fruit. Nathan's eyes filled with tears when he saw me walking down the aisle, my father by my side. That moment, seeing the love in Nathan's expression, crystallized everything important about this day. My parents sat in the front row, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Madison and Jack were a few rows back, dressed appropriately subdued compared to their usual flashy style. The gathering was smaller than our original guest list, only 80 people instead of the planned 150, but every person present genuinely cared about us. Nathan's grandfather conducted a service that was both deeply spiritual and personally meaningful, incorporating readings we had selected together and stories of our relationship. When we exchanged vows we had written ourselves, the words came from a place of profound truth, shaped by the challenges we had weathered together. Hazel, Nathan said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, I promise to stand by you through every joy and challenge life brings our way. The past months have shown me that together, we can face anything. Your strength, your integrity, and your heart are why I fall more in love with you each day. My own vows, spoken through happy tears, echoed similar sentiments of partnership, resilience, and enduring love. The reception that followed was held in a beautifully decorated barn on the property. Simple wildflower centerpieces adorned tables covered with crisp white linens. Strings of twinkling lights hung from the rafters, creating a magical atmosphere as evening fell. The food truck we'd hired served a delicious meal of elevated comfort food, and a small local band played our favorite songs for dancing. During his toast, Nathan surprised me by acknowledging the journey to this day. Some of you know that our wedding plans changed significantly over the past few months, he said, raising his glass. What you might not know is how those changes ultimately created something more authentic and meaningful than what we originally planned. Hazel faced disappointment with remarkable grace and turned obstacles into opportunities. I couldn't be prouder to call her my wife. His words brought fresh tears to my eyes, and I noticed, to my mother's as well. There was a moment during the father-daughter dance when Dad whispered, I'm sorry, Hazel, for everything, and I knew he truly meant it, even if he still didn't fully understand the depth of the hurt he had caused. The most unexpected moment came when Madison approached me between dances, looking uncharacteristically nervous. This is beautiful, Hazel, she said, gesturing around the barn. More beautiful than any wedding I've been to. It feels so, you and Nathan. Thank you, I replied, genuinely touched by her comment. I know we still have a lot to work through, she continued, but I want you to know I'm committed to being a better sister. What happened with the money? I'll find a way to make it right someday. I didn't know if that was possible, but I appreciated the sentiment. Let's just focus on today, I suggested, and maybe try for a fresh start moving forward. As the night progressed, surrounded by love and celebration, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The betrayal by my parents had been painful beyond words, but it had also catalyzed important growth and realizations. I had learned to set boundaries, to advocate for myself, and to distinguish between healthy and unhealthy family dynamics. Nathan and I left our reception under a shower of biodegradable confetti, climbing into his car decorated with "Just Married" signs by his cousins. As we drove away, I looked back at the twinkling lights of the barn where our loved ones continued celebrating. Happy? Nathan asked, reaching for my hand. Very, I replied honestly. It wasn't the wedding we originally planned, but it was perfect in its own way. Better, I think, he said. It was authentic. It was us. In the months that followed, my relationship with my parents slowly evolved into something new, not the unquestioning closeness of before, but a more mature connection based on clearer boundaries and growing mutual respect. They were making efforts to treat Madison and me more equitably, though old patterns occasionally resurfaced. Madison and I were finding our way toward a different kind of sisterhood, one less defined by competition and comparison. We would never be best friends, but we were learning to appreciate each other's strengths and support each other's journeys. The wedding fund betrayal had shaken my foundation in profound ways, forcing me to reevaluate my place in my family and my expectations of relationships. Yet, through that painful process, I had discovered my own resilience and the true value of the family Nathan and I were creating together, one built on trust, respect, and promises kept. As I look back now, I understand that while money was the catalyst for our family crisis, the real issues ran much deeper. The betrayal exposed fault lines that had existed for years, forcing us to finally address them. The healing isn't complete, perhaps it never will be entirely, but we're moving forward with greater awareness and intention. The most important lesson I've learned is that family doesn't always mean blood relations. Sometimes, family is found in friends who rally around you in hard times, coworkers who take up collections, and partners who stand steadfastly by your side. It's about who shows up, who keeps their promises, who honors your worth. Nathan and I have agreed that when we have children of our own, we'll work consciously to avoid the patterns of favoritism that marked my childhood. We'll recognize each child's unique needs while ensuring they all feel equally valued and loved. We'll make promises carefully and keep them faithfully. What has your experience been with family favoritism or broken promises? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members, and how did that work out? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences and lessons learned. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to stand up for themselves, even with family. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most painful challenges lead to the most beautiful growth. Until next time, this is Hazel, wishing you strength, healing, and the courage to create the life and relationships you truly deserve.